husbands, Has anybody ever heard of Carolyn Wells before today? Here?
No.
Okay, nobody's heard of her, and that seems sad because she was very, very important in her day. In fact, Carolyn Wells, during her lifetime, was known as America's most famous mystery writer. Okay, and we've heard of other mystery writers that seem to have lasted through the ages, but for some reason she has kind of been lost in time. She actually had a career that spanned 40 years, and she was, well known for those 40 years. But and somehow she was lost, even though she also produced at least 178 works of other kinds as well. So it is funny why she has kind of gone along the wayside. But Carolyn Wells, I'll give you a little history of her family. As you can see, she's buried here, and her parents are over there, and siblings. And Carolyn was born right here in Rahway. She was born in June 18th, 1862, and she was the second child born to her mother and father, William and Anna. Anna Woodruff was her maiden name. And the Woodruff family is back here behind us because during 1862, when the Civil War was raging, the Wells family lived with the Woodruff to help with finances and help each other during the wartime. So they lived together over on Seminary Road, which is over here, not far, in Rahway during that time period. So Carolyn was not the first child born. Her brother, Frank, was born first, but he died in infancy. He's buried here. And then she came along in 1862. She was followed by her sister, Allie, 3 years later. And during the 1860s, they both contracted, I think Carolyn was 6 and Allie was 3. They contracted scarlet fever. And unfortunately, Allie passed away at 3 years old, where Carolyn survived, but she became deaf in one ear for her lifetime and partially deaf in the other. But she didn't let it bother her. She went on and did the things she wanted to do and seemed to get along okay with that, disability. So let's see, let's forward to 1871. The war's over now, and her father procures a job, a career in real estate insurance in New York City. He becomes a wealthy guy. He travels he gets on the train and goes into New York for his job and comes back again. And they were able to buy a beautiful home, a Victorian-style home, in 1871. And here's a picture of the house. It still exists today. It's a beautiful Victorian-style home. And it's on Elm and Estherbrook. You can take a ride past there if you ever want to. And it's kept very pristine right now, and to this day. The people that own it keep it up. Eventually, I was talking to Al Shipley, and hopefully someday they may be able to make it like a museum where you could, because of her, walk through it and see inside. It's beautiful home. Years later, it became a doctor's office, I know that. And there was a doctor, people who grew up in Rahway knew him as the doctor, went there for, to be treated. And then it went to another doctor, and now whoever owns it just keeps it up. So nobody lives in it. But yeah, they just keep it very nice. So, okay, so Carolyn, who grew up in Rahway, they moved there in 1871, like I said. She went all through the Rahway schools. She wrote her first book when she was 6 years old. It was a little child's book story, and she loved, from an early age, loved literature. And she graduated Rahway High School as valedictorian of her class, her senior class. And she was a very smart woman. Her father said to her after high school, you want to go to college? I'd like you to go to college. And she said, no, I don't want to go to college. And he said, well, why not? And she said, well, because I want to study what I want to study, not what somebody else wants me to study. So I thought that was very progressive thinking for a person, a woman in 1880s. You know, that was progressive. And you didn't go against your father back then. That was not done. But she decided she wanted to learn different things like Shakespeare. She wanted to read all Shakespeare. She learned German, French. She learned history, botany, many things that she wanted to learn, and which she did. So she became a very educated woman. Now, during that time period, she was upper middle class. That's what they called, and they had a maid, you know, who helped at the house. She was upper middle class, and young ladies of that stature did not do certain things. There are certain things that they were supposed to do. And one of the things they weren't able to do was to get a job. Now, she wasn't interested in getting married. Her parents wanted her to, but she wasn't interested at that time. And she said, why get married? That just puts more restrictions on you as a woman. Kind of smart thinking, although I'm married. But, so she wasn't interested in her 20s. She had lots of friends. She couldn't get a job. She wasn't allowed to procure a position, a paid position of any kind. But she could work in the house, but she did a lot of work there. Canning, dressmaking, painting china, cooking, things like that. She entertained. She was helped with the entertaining of her household. And she also was allowed to join social clubs, which she did, and enjoyed them, and had many friends. Well, she turns about 30 years old. She says to her father, I want to get a job. And he says, well, you can't. You're not allowed to, of your position. Well, I want to, and I'm going to get a job. So she gets a job. Since she liked literature, where do you think she got a job? Library. She became the assistant librarian in Rahway Library, which is still there. The brick building is down there in the middle of Rahway. I think it's a community art center right now. And she got a job there, was able to walk from her house right to the library, walk to work. She quickly became head librarian and remained head librarian for 12 years in that position. Now, she never married, so she had to live at home until she was married. Young ladies of that stature had to live at home until they were married, no matter how old they were. She worked there in the library, and she loved it because she could read as much as she wanted, learn as much as she wanted, and do whatever she wanted to do, which she did. She decided that a few years went by, she decided, I'm going to try to get serious about my own writing. So she started writing, and she loved writing children's books, children's stories, poems, riddles. She did limericks. She did nonsense verses, anything she could for children. She loved doing that. She again said, well, since all these books, I'm surrounded by all these books, why don't I try to get some of my works published? So she sent them into publishing companies, and they sent them back. She sent them in again, and they sent them back to different publishing companies. Why do you think?
She's a female.
She's a woman, exactly. So women weren't allowed. They didn't want to take a chance on a woman, publishing their works because they didn't know if they'd make any money. They didn't want to take a chance on women. So she didn't let it discourage her. She continued to do that, send in, and finally one publishing company got tired of her keep sending stuff in, so they said, let's try it. And they published her first book in 1896, and it was called The Sign of the Sphinx, and it was a collection of verse, riddles, and limericks, and stories for children. Well, it became a hit. Everybody loved it. They loved it, and so other publishing companies saw that it was working, she was making money, so they decided to publish some of her things as well. And she got so good that she could quit her job as head librarian in Rahway, which she always gave credit to them for her helping her, and she never forgot her roots at Rahway and how much they helped her in the library and in the town itself. She did this for about 14 years, and she just said that I'm tired of writing children's books. I want to gear my works more toward adults. That's when the mystery stories were born. She started writing mystery stories. She wrote 70 mystery novels, and she had her own character called Fleming Stone, who was similar to Sherlock Holmes. Okay, we all remember Sherlock Holmes, but for some reason, what happened to Fleming Stone? She wrote so many of them, and nobody remembers them. It said from 1910 to 1940, she wrote 70 mystery novels and had created her own detective character, Fleming Stone. We haven't heard about. I haven't read one, I know, but they somehow went to the wayside, I guess. And so, but she kept doing it anyway, and she was very famous at her time. In fact, Hollywood picked up one of her stories, and guess what they did? Made a movie. 1927. The movie was called Dearie, D-E-A-R-I-E, and she was given full credit for the writing of that story, and they made a movie out of it. Now it's 1927. I believe it was silent film.
Talkie or silent?
It might have been a talkie. I don't know. I got to check on that. Somebody asked me that. They said talkies didn't come into 1929, but I have to check on that. Excuse me. So she got that done as well as Hollywood picking her up. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. She finally married. She married Hadwin Houghton. Now Houghton was he was the heir to the Houghton Mifflin Publishing Company. And she did marry him, so she married wealthy. She got to what? Move out of her parents' house. She was 55 years old when she first married him. She stayed with her parents, and that's what you did until you were married. So she marries him. She moves to New York City, which was like a lifelong dream of her to live in New York City because of all the publishing companies and everything there. And she was married for exactly 1 year and 4 months, and he dies. But he left her a lot of money. She able to stay in New York City. She got jobs working at the New York Times, and she was one of the first founders of the New York Times crossword puzzles. She did that. And she worked for the New York Herald and the New York Globe, and she wrote humorous stories for them. She was able to travel. She became good friends with Mark Twain. He wanted her to read her poetry at his 70th birthday, so she was able to do that. President Theodore Roosevelt loved her limericks, loved her nonsense verses, and he invited her to the White House when he was there and had her read some of her works to him and his friends and family there. So she was very well known at the time, and they loved her work. She lived in New York City until she died 25 years later in 1942. She wanted to be interred here with her family and her husband. They brought her back here and did that for her. The lady, she lived 80 years, so she did a lot of accomplishment. Even with her deafness, she was able to accomplish a lot in her lifetime. The lady, there was a woman who was interested in her and wanted to know what happened to her. Why are her works not remembered where people like Mark Twain, Conan with Sherlock Holmes are all remembered? So this woman, Rebecca Barry, came here in the year 2021, and she did she did research. She talked to Al Shipley. Al Shipley took her down to the Rahway Library, where they discovered, Al Shipley knew about it, where she discovered there's a room there that you have to get a key and you have to have an appointment to go in it. It has all her original, 80 of her original works over here at the library. So the woman who wrote this book called The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells did her investigations at Rahway Library with Al Shipley, and she came here to the cemetery. She went to Carolyn's house. She wanted to see everything to write her book about why. Her questions were things like, why did somebody who was so well known at the time, who wrote more than 80 mysteries, hundreds of other works between the years 1890s and 1940s, whatever happened to her and her legacy? What happened to, why did the name of Carolyn Wells get lost in time? Why were her stories lost in time? What happened to her novels? Those are the questions this writer asked, and this is her book. And in order to find the answers to those questions, you got to buy the book. So they're selling it over there. But I wanted you to know that she became very famous with other people. And I'm going to read just a couple little quick things for you. This is an example of one of her nonsense verses. It's for children. It's called The Purple Cow. I never saw a purple cow. I never hoped to see one. But I can tell you anyhow, I'd rather see than be one. That was one of hers. And somebody in one of the other groups remembered reading that as a child.
Interesting.
This is an example of one of her limericks. A tutor who tooted the flute tried to teach two young tutors to toot. Said the two to the tutor, is it harder to toot or to tutor to tutors to toot?
Try saying that 5 times fast.
Yeah, and the last one I'm going to read is another limerick, which I thought was funny. A canner, exceedingly canny, one morning remarked to his granny, a canner can anything that he can, but a canner can't can a can he?
Woodchuck, 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 wood.
Woodchuck, wood. So these are some of her limericks. There's so many poems she wrote, so many stories, and hopefully we'll find out why she vanished into, is lost in time as far as being famous. So thank you for coming.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.
I don't know how